Now, the third approach to studying business, now this is called the normative objective function of the financial manager. Now, this particular theory, this particular approach to studying business, this is usually what infuses all finance textbooks, most business school textbooks that you study. It's really about achieving what's called the normative objective function of the financial manager. Now, the normative objective function of the financial manager is to maximize shareholder wealth given some level of risk. And you'll note that I've boxed off a few terms here. Now, indeed, when we talk about maximization, maximization means that you want to reach the zenith, the highest point. That is, if you're going to maximize wealth, you don't want to maximize somebody's wealth at $200,000 if you can make it $600,000. Maximization, reaching the zenith or the highest point. The other thing about maximization is that it's long-term in nature. You're not going to maximize income in 6 months or a year or something like that. It's going to be a longer-term process. So maximization applies two things. One, that it's something long-term in nature, and two, that whatever you're trying to maximize, you want to reach the zenith, the highest point. Now, in this particular theory now, what you want to maximize is shareholder wealth. The owners of the company, the common shareholders, that's whose wealth you're trying to maximize. Maximizing shareholder wealth, maximizing the value of the firm, maximizing the price of the stock in the market, all those mean the same thing, okay? So what we're trying to maximize in this approach now is shareholder wealth, the owner's wealth. That, as a financial manager, that's who you work for. Whether that means you're working for yourself or working for another group of folks, it doesn't matter. You're talking about shareholder wealth, owner's wealth. That's what we're talking about here. Now, you want to maximize shareholder wealth given some level of risk. Now, let's be honest now. Risk is a code word for statistics. And there'll be a module where we study statistics and how we look at statistics and sort of how you bring statistics to study in business. And we'll do all that kind of stuff. But that's called risk, okay? And we'll talk a little bit more about risk in a moment here. Now, this word normative. In academics now, there are two kinds of theories that we have. One's called a normative theory. The other's known as a positive theory. Now, a normative theory tells you the way things should be, but not necessarily the way things are. So when I teach you time value of money, that's the way you should do time value of money. You may very well go out and work for a company or a bank, and they do time value of money differently. Well, that just means they're really doing it wrong. A little bit arrogant approach, but it's called the normative approach. It's a normative theory, and it tells you the way things should be done, not necessarily the way things are done. The other type of theory now is called a positive theory. And a positive theory tells you the way things are, but not necessarily the way things should be. So if we, as a project, sent out surveys to all the local bankers and asked them how they go about determining who gets a loan at the bank, we might get back the information and find out that, well, they tend to like to give loans to more to men than women. Well, when we write an article about this and we say that, that doesn't mean we think that's the way they should do things. That's simply the way they are doing things. That's a positive theory. That's a positive approach, and that's what would be reflected in an article like that. Normative theory, positive theory. These are the two kinds of theories that you're going to run across. Risk now. We're going to study statistics in in later videos and all. And we'll talk more about how you relate that to companies and choose between investments and things like that. But right now what I want you to understand is risk in business now, in finance. Risk is anything other than the expected. Risk is anything other than the expected. If something happens unexpectedly, you have no time to plan for it. That's when something causes lots of problems. If, on the other hand, you know what to expect, You know that something's going to happen. You can predict something happening. Well, that means you have time to plan for that, and it won't have a big impact on the company. A risk is something other than the expected. Expected things are not risk. Unexpected things, that's what risk is, and that's where it comes from, and that adds to the volatility of a company's earnings.